Good day. My name is Rhonda Schachterly, and I am the Director of Student Services for Christ Redeemer Catholic Schools. Today, we are going to take a little bit of time and talk about our ARC Facilitator program, what that means for our schools, how we are using that to address a problem of practice that we have in our schools, how it's working, and where we plan to go in the future. Obviously, our hope is that through this presentation, there may be something that will be a takeaway for you and your schools as you do your important work. A little bit of context. Our school board is considered rural, so we have 17 schools across a vast geographical area, including Okotoks, High River, Brooks, Canmore, Oyen, and Drumheller. Our problem of practice. We are seeing more and more of our teachers and our schools reporting dysregulation so that our students are not available to learn and teachers are having to try to manage that in their classrooms. Our educational assistants were feeling ill-equipped to work with dysregulation, and we have a lack of resources and services being that we are a rural board. Considerations. Are there any ways that we can support our schools with this regulation? Are there any ways that we can develop a greater skill set, knowledge base, and a lens of compassion in our educational assistance? And how can we do this without adding more resources to our school? So our overarching question is there a way that we can develop this knowledge base and skill set and so that students are being worked with in a proactive manner, that our educational assistants and our staff are proactively supporting our students rather than being positioned in a reactive manner? So a little more context, our school board has done a lot of work on trauma-informed practice and the work of Blostein and Kinnenberg, and perhaps we thought we could use that as a foundation for this important work. What is ARC? ARC is training and targeted background knowledge for facilitators. We created very intentionally a standalone lesson plan to better equip our team so that they could have a kit that they could use. That coupled with a little bit of knowledge and perhaps a change in lens would create, hopefully, a more supportive endeavor for our students. This supportive structure was created as a collaborative endeavor by Director of Student Services, Coordinator of Mental Health, and Occupational Therapists. So what did we do? We organized a training day for staff, including our educational assistants, our family school liaison workers, and our connections personnel, and some administrators. And the purpose of that was to really support our educational assistants and have a wraparound with mental health knowledge within our school and our OTs as well, to make sure that individuals developed a little bit more of a knowledge base. The primary goal was to establish foundational understanding and really create, at the very least, we thought if we can create a culture of compassion among individuals and curiosity when they're approaching students, that might shift how we are doing our work. So we spent a bit of time talking about attachment, regulation, and competency, and what does that mean? So we talked about how important it is to have relationships with our students, that we are able to focus on attachment and relationship, and that's central to everything that we do. We talked about how students need to be regulated in order to be available to learn in our classroom. And we talked about resiliency, choice, empowerment, and future self and goal setting. So we started off our days by taking a look at what are we seeing in classrooms, and though they might not have had the actual vocabulary and terminology associated with hypervigilance, opposition, executive functioning, they most certainly understood the characteristics that were being displayed in our classroom. So we brainstormed kind of what are you seeing and how can we support this work. We took a look at trauma and what trauma means for staff. We moved into understanding toxic stress. We took a look at the brain. We took a look at what happens when a brain is impacted by trauma. and also had the disclaimer with their staff that we don't know that every individual has been impacted with trauma. We don't necessarily know, but what is good for one is good for all in this particular set of circumstances. We talked about how important it is to come from a place of restorative, to come from a place of compassion, to come from a place of attachment. And we spoke about how when individuals come to us with some sort of stuff in their backpack that maybe we are aware of or are unaware of, being punitive is not really where we want to be. We want to be a soft place to land for our students. We talked about childhood adverse experiences and talked about the impacts of those on individuals. We talked about there is a likelihood that some of the individuals that we work with may fall into this category, and even if they don't, they should be treated with compassion and understanding. We looked at attachment and moved into caregiver affect. So we talked about how important it is for our teams when we're working with students to regulate yourself, that we really need to be in charge of our own emotional responses and how we need to be cognizant of where we are when we are approaching an individual, that we need to be that soft spot. We talked about ongoing self-care, preparation, things you can do before you're going to work with a student, in the pocket strategies, so things like having the student take a sip of water or yourself taking a sip of water, and things that you can do after. So if you have been doing some hard work with the student, that it's okay to take a few minutes and go for a walk, or make sure that you are regulated so your best self is showing up for your work with students. We then talked about attunement, your ability to read the emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and physiological cues of another, and that quite often the students that they're working with, our educational assistants are their go-to person. So we really affirmed how important their work is. We talked about how some of the difficult behaviors that we see are really unmet needs, and that our function is to support our students with their needs. And that it really just honoring their work, honoring how important it is for our students to be in a place where the adults around them are supportive. We talked about effective responses, predictability, safety, control, connection, containment, that we need to be that safe person. We also at this time spoke about how if there is a situation where an educational assistant, for whatever reason, does not feel they are the best person, that's a conversation in our school's learning support. We focused on zones of arousal, did a lot of work on social engagement, how our teams, what that is, and working with our students so we can help our students identify where they're at, so we can help our students develop strategies for how to move themselves back to their baseline. We then took a look at relational connection, having students build skills and tolerance for internal experiences, building connection and meeting their needs, the safety and relationship, the comfort in that is so important, that's our foundation, and how important it is for our teams to create opportunities for connection. We really wanted our facilitators to understand you're a central person in this child's life, and it is fantastic if you seek opportunities to create connection. And it was really impressive to see how our team really took that to heart and moved with it. And again, modeling, we talked about modeling, we talked about coaching, we talked about normalizing, and really making sure that the students know that they are there, that they're in their corner. We then talked about executive functioning skills and part of our plan. So at this stage of the game, what executive functioning actually is, how that impacts students in our classroom. And then later on, we have some work directed around that. We looked at supporting students, their concept of self, their concept of their own identity, that they are unique, they're positive, they're cohesive, and future planning of having goals, having a sense of what they're going to do with their lives or with their creative talents. So our goal is to, with this facilitator, is to get them to a place where they feel like they have voice, they have advocacy, and they're able to be agents of change in their own lives. So for the purpose of the CTR ARC lesson plan, we started off with attachment. We then moved into regulation, which again, attachment was primarily created by mental health, regulation by our occupational therapists, and then within regulation, mindfulness and movement, which was a bit of a blend between both, and then ending with the area of competency. For instance, in the area of attachment, we would start with what the facilitator does. They model. At that time we were using zones, so even currently we still use zones in some of our schools. So identifying where they are at and seeing if there's any insight into why they feel that they are in that zone. Always obviously reminding students that no zone is bad, and allowing a little bit of room for discussion. Why are you feeling that way? How do you know you're feeling? How do you know? What is that manifesting like for you? We then would move into regulation movement, which is facilitator does. So they would select a deck of green cards. They would move alongside the student and do the exercises with them, the regulation piece, which was a really important piece of this component. The facilitator would select around 10 cards and they would review the exercises and look at them together. Now, this program for the movement facilitator does, we had it set up so that typically we know educational assistants in our schools would go into a room and kind of sit at the back for the first 10 or 15 minutes while the teacher was doing direct instruction. What we did through this was move that so that our educational assistants would rotate throughout the school during that time and work with students. Some of the work, depending on the student, was done one-on-one. Some of the work with students was done small groups. Some of the work with students was done multiple times within a block, and other times it would be more of once a week, depending on the needs of that student, completely based upon the needs of the student and conversation within the school. We move to the regulation mindfulness facilitator. They would have a lesson plan where they would take cards from the rethink. The facilitator and the student would complete a card together and have a discussion. And this is a sample of some of the resources that we included in the kit. A mindful deck, mindfulness cards deck, yoga, mindfulness, effective questioning sheet. So it was a little bit fluid based upon the student, but there was a plethora of materials for the educational assistant to use. Competency facilitator does. Again, resources in the kit included should I, shouldn't I, zones of regulation, choices in a jar, collaborative problem solving sheet, and the facilitator and the student do one activity together. And again, that is also the attachment piece embedded in there and also co-regulation for our students. So what did that look like in our schools? It is coordinated by our learning support teachers, so they decide kind of what it looks like in their schools. It has moved now to not only being educational assistants that do it. In some of our schools, family school liaison workers are also taking pieces of ARC and also adding a little bit of a lens of mental health in certain areas. The learning support determines who needs ARC by a referral from classroom teachers, and then the needs are generated. Typically, educational assistants at the beginning of a class then float to support dysregulated students. A very high number of our schools now have moved to having a dedicated educational assistant supporting ARC. And the impact of that is that we have greater levels of regulation in our students. We have on occasion had students with severe ADHD that were experiencing significant challenges, even remaining in the classroom for an 80-minute block. And we were able to support the individual. We would go in and have targeted support about every 40 minutes. the individual through that, when he completed ARC, was then able to enter the classroom again and be available to learn until the next 40-minute session came. It progressed to the point where that student now has self-regulation strategies and will say to his teachers, I need a break, I need to go regulate. So it really has moved into a school culture piece for Christ the Redeemer, and we're very proud of that. Our discipline has decreased with the use of ARC, and even a shift with our teachers, in that we need to, the knowledge base of regulation and attachment need to be central to our work so that we can have students available for curriculum outcomes in our classes. So we are very, very happy with how ARC is progressing, and we look forward to kind of seeing where it leads us as a school division. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I would love to talk to you about what's happening in our schools and connect you with some of our schools if you would like. I hope you have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye-bye.